Don Higson, thank you very much for joining me here on Newsnight. Is it fair to say, in your opinion, that the risk, the threat from Fukushima, the radiation fallout there, has been exaggerated?
Oh, greatly exaggerated, yes.
In what way?
There was essentially, in my view, no risk from radiation to the public at all. There probably wouldn't have been any significant risk even if evacuation hadn't taken place. There are certainly some significant doses of radiation to workers on the site, but nobody has been harmed, obviously harmed. There's no discernible harm at the moment, but it is possible to predict that there will be some very small risks to some of those workers. But the idea that people were dicing with death and that there's some terrible tide of deadly radiation sweeping across the Pacific to America, this is all completely misguided ideas about the risks.
But is that underestimating it? Because this is a nuclear accident that's been put almost on par with Chernobyl.
Yes, well, Chernobyl really was the only accident in the 60-year history of nuclear power generation in which there have been any real health effects. I mean, obviously, 32 people died, 31 died, 28 of them from radiation exposure, and it's been estimated that there will be some further deaths predicted amongst the workforce, and there have been some public health effects from radiation at Chernobyl. There certainly was a major disaster at Chernobyl, but Fukushima, as I said, there have been no health effects observed at all.
But is it simply too early to tell just yet? Are we likely to see an impact on people's health in the future from the Fukushima disaster?
Well, I don't think there's going to be any future health effects, physical health effects from radiation to the general public. I can't be absolutely certain about that, but I doubt if there will be any, and there certainly won't be discernible health effects. Will, of course, be a huge psychological health impact from this due to fear of radiation, but that's a quite different matter altogether. Now, as I say, some workers, there may be some delayed health effects from radiation to a few of the workers, possibly. There have been about 100 workers who've had significant doses of radiation, but amongst those 100, the risks from radiation have been extremely small. There might be, I doubt if there would ever be a discernible increase in the incidence of cancer even amongst the workforce.
Yet why do we hear of radiation levels now 18 times higher than first expected? Is that not cause for concern?
Obviously, there are on the site itself, on the reactor site itself, there are places where radiation levels have been very high, and there may still be some where radiation levels are high. But you've got to realise that all these workers on the site are subject to health physics controls, which these radiation levels are closely monitored and are well recognised, and people are protected from them. But the suggestion that there has been massive leaking of highly radioactive water from this plant is really an overstatement of the situation. There have been some leaks, sure, and there's some detectable radiation, but you can detect radiation at extremely low levels, far below levels that are dangerous.
What about the concern in the United States that contaminated water that's being pumped into the Pacific Ocean could find its way to their shores?
Well, I don't think there's any impact at all. I mean, as I say, you may well be able to measure radiation levels, and certainly it'll be important that radiation in seafood that's taken from the areas around Fukushima itself should be monitored to make sure that radiation levels don't go too high there. But you see, there's already far more radioactive material in the oceans that could ever be put there by the nuclear industry. and the increase in levels of these materials is going to be, well, I say it may be measurable, but it'll be trivial.
So taking a line from what you've been telling me, why is it that you believe the fear outstrips the reality?
Well, the fear of radiation is due to this mistaken belief that there is no safe dose of radiation, which is simply not true. And this, I'm afraid, arises from a recommendation by the International Commission on Radiological Protection that they recommend the use of a calculational model which assumes that the risk is proportional to the dose without a threshold. Now, I think they are really going to have to rethink that, but they're very reluctant to do so. It's a tool that's used in, to facilitate the practice of radiation protection by health physicists and engineers who are involved in this, but the International Commission on Radiological Protection and the United Nations Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation have both quite clearly said that it is a complete misuse of this calculational model to start estimating numbers of deaths that will occur from low levels of radiation. And this is something that many people take no notice of that recommendation. They just say, well, there's no safe dose of radiation, so well, it's a misunderstanding of the science. And I'm afraid there has been a terrible problem of communication on this particular issue between the authorities and the public, and that's been, I think, the major source of the problem from this particular reactor accident. I mean, it was also a very significant problem at Chernobyl, because although Chernobyl was a real disaster in terms of public health effects and worker health effects, these have been greatly exaggerated because of this belief that there's no safe dose of radiation.
Just finally, Dr. Higson, what is the impact likely to be on the future of the nuclear power industry?
Well, I mean, it's already had a devastating impact on the nuclear industry, because there was a renaissance of that industry well underway about two or 3 years ago, and this has stopped dead in its tracks because of Fukushima. Now, this is, in my view, quite illogical. I mean, for example, Germany is shutting down its nuclear power stations because of the Fukushima accident, but on the other hand, Germany doesn't worry itself about tsunamis. I mean, there are coastal communities in Germany which could be devastated by a tsunami. They're not taking measures to protect them, but they're worried about the possibility that their nuclear power stations will have an accident, when really there is no real possibility at all that their nuclear power stations could be damaged by a tsunami. And yet that's what caused the Fukushima disaster. It was a tsunami, purely and simply a tsunami, that caused this accident.
Don Higson, thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you on the program.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.